Good afternoon, everybody. We are happy to see you all here. Some of the faces are familiar to me because we met, when was it, 2 months ago or so? November, when the ambassador was supposed to be here.
23rd, I think.
And it couldn't do that because of the terrible weather and the terrible traffic. So we gain by that because we are having 2 meetings. We had a very interesting meeting then with many people, and we had a long hour discussion about the Middle East, and now we're having for the 2nd time, so we are lucky. The reason we invited the ambassador is to continue the program that we started some months ago when we had the guest of honor, the Israeli ambassador. And he spoke to us mainly about the relations between Israel and the United States. And then we moved, as one can expect, to the current affairs. So the idea is to do the same today. We'll start with some of the ambassador's thoughts about the relations between the Palestinians and the United States, but I'm sure that we'll move to the wider question of the Middle East, and particularly in view of the developments in Egypt and in Tunisia and the rest of the region. So this is what we are going to do now. The ambassador will talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and interesting debate. I'm sure it will be very interesting, even more than the one that we had last time. A few words about our guest. Ambassador Areikat is the official representative of the PLO in the United States. The Palestinian Authority do not have yet an ambassador. They have their representative of the PLO. And prior to his appointment to Washington, Mr. Areikat served for 11 years as the Negotiations Affairs Department of the PLO in Ramallah. Most recently, as its deputy head and coordinator general. Before that, he joined the NAD, that's the organization, the department, in 1998, when it was headed by current Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who is known as Abu Mazen. And he served as its deputy, as a director general until March 2008. Prior to his service at NAD, Mr. Areikat spent 5 years at the Orient House. Do you know what's the Orient House? That's the headquarters of the PLO in East Jerusalem and later of other Palestinian organizations in East Jerusalem, and of the Palestinian negotiation team to the Madrid peace talks. While at Orient House, he served as spokesperson for the late Mr. Faisal Husseini, the former PLO Executive Committee member in charge of Jerusalem affairs, and later as desk officer to the US, Canada, Australia, and South Africa in Orient House International Relations Department. So we have someone who knows not only the Palestinian issue, the Israeli-Palestinian problem, but the intricacies and the details of the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations, and I'm looking forward to hear you.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Perry. It's a pleasure to be here. First of all, and I want to pronounce this properly, I would like to thank the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies, Director Dr. Yoram Perry, and Executive Director Dr. Paul Sham, sitting in the back, and of course the University of Maryland for inviting me. And I would like to start by apologizing for the November event, and I remember the same day a lady from a newspaper here called me, and she called the office, and the office called me back, said, you know, you have an urgent call from this journalist reporter, you have to call her back, she's upset and she thinks that you didn't show up on purpose, and et cetera, et cetera. So I got the number and I called her back, and she asked me, was it really the traffic? I said, would you believe if I told you it was the traffic? It was really the traffic. And I was sitting in the car for exactly 3 hours. I didn't move out of the car for exactly 3 hours until it became too late, and I decided to go back. So my apologies for any inconvenience, but Dr. Perry assured me in our discussion earlier that you did, whoever was here of you on that date, enjoy a very constructive discussion about issues related to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I know that when Ambassador Oren was here, he talked in depth about the Israeli-US relationship. As Palestinians, we, of course, don't have a history of Palestinian-US relationship, because our relationship with the United States went through different stages. I would say since the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, we can go a little bit back to the partition plan. The United States did lobby with certain members of the UN General Assembly to make them vote in favor of the partition plan of Palestine and the creation of 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab. They thought maybe at the time that this should be the best outcome for that continued conflict in Palestine. And then in 1948, when Israel was created, President Truman recognized Israel. It's interesting for many of you to know that on the letter that was submitted to him by his Secretary of State for the recognition, actually the Secretary of State at the time was George Marshall. Marshall, I think, the Secretary of State advised the President against recognizing Israel, because he thought that this would drag the United States into conflict in the Middle East and will antagonize the Arabs and the Muslims, which, I mean, we can talk about that later. It did. He accepted to recognize Israel, the State of Israel, because in the paper that was submitted to President Truman, it says the Jewish State of Israel, and he scratched the Jewish state and put the State of Israel at the time. And it is a copy that you can find here, in the library, and we can provide you with that copy. I'm just saying that because that recognition was crucial for Israel. And since 1948, the United States was trying to fill the vacuum that was filled before by Britain and France. They were the 2 colonial powers in the region. Their strength and their power started to wane and to weaken, and the United States thought, as a rising power now, they have to be more involved in international politics. That particular recognition and the fact that the United States played a role in mustering enough votes at the UN General Assembly for the partition of Palestine did create some resentment on the part of the Palestinians and the Arabs that the United States was unfair in supporting that partition plan. And then the whole conflict took a different direction. It wasn't from the beginning a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It was an Arab-Israeli conflict. And the Palestinians, lacking an independent leadership at the time, were very much influenced by the neighboring Arab countries. I mean, the PLO was recognized as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people only in November 1974. And it happened in the Rabat Arab Summit conference, or Arab Summit in Morocco, and against the wishes of few Arab countries who didn't want to allow the PLO to be the representative of the Palestinian people. So from 1948 up, I would say, until the 70s, the Palestinian-US relationship was defined in the context of Arab or pan-Arab relationship with the United States. It didn't have a separate, distinguished character to differentiate it from the overall relationship between the Arab countries. And during the 50s, we started to witness the rise of Arab nationalism. And it all started, it's just a coincidence to talk about that, with the revolt of a group of Egyptian officers against King Farouk of Egypt. And they ended the monarchy in Egypt and established a republic. President Jamal Abdel Nasser took over, and he started projecting his pan-Arab nationalism, and many countries supported President Nasser, and we Palestinians saw in President Nasser as a hope for us to end the conflict with Israel and create a homeland for the Palestinians. But we never really had a choice in defining the relationship with the United States. And whenever the relation between the United States and the Arab countries was going well, it impacted the Palestinians, and the opposite was true. It's interesting to note here that in 1956, when Israel, France, and Britain attacked Egypt to take control of the Suez Canal, it was actually the position of the United States, along with the Soviet Union at the time, but it was a strong position by the United States that was taking, that forced Britain, France, and Israel to cease their attacks against Egypt and pull out their troops from the Sinai Desert. I think this explains why, because the US did not want to see the British and the French once again spread their influence in the region, and they wanted to have a much more active role in determining the future of the Middle East. So riding on the wave of Arab nationalism, the Palestinians became, I would say, more hardline in their demands, that Palestine has to be liberated from the river to the sea, and we will not recognize the existence of the State of Israel. And until 1967, when the June War erupted, and the Palestinians found themselves that not only the 78% of the land, which was under Israeli control before the war of 67, 78% of historic Palestine, but also the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, including East Jerusalem, became under Israeli occupation. And all of historic Palestine now was under Israeli control, in addition to the Sinai Desert and the Golan Heights of Syria. Take you back in 1965, the PLO was established. And on January 1st, 1965, a group of Palestinian intellectuals, academicians, professionals decided to establish the Palestine Liberation Organization in an attempt to take control of the destiny and the future of the Palestinian people. Once again, this effort was not supported by many Arabs, and the PLO got into internal conflicts with Jordan in 1970, which led to the expulsion of the PLO from Jordan to Lebanon. And as you all know, later in Lebanon in 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon and led to the expulsion of the PLO from Lebanon to Tunisia. And during that period, the Palestinians, not only rhetoric but also actions, resorted to certain activities and actions such as plane hijackings, taking hostages, in order to bring attention or to highlight their struggle. I mean, now, when we look back at that, at the time, I have to admit that this action enjoyed support and sympathy from the Palestinians. But now, when we look back at that and look at the current situation, we believe that maybe there should have been a different approach to these issues, because eventually they did not lead to any practical results other than getting maybe the international attention that we wanted to get at the time. This, of course, soured the relationship further between between the United States and the Palestinians, and the US had an official policy of not talking to the PLO until the PLO recognized Israel's right to exist. And of course, in the 70s and early 80s, that was an impossibility for the Palestinians, for the PLO to recognize the right of Israel to exist. And at the same time, of course, we saw an Israeli side who also did not want to recognize the PLO or the existence of the Palestinian people and their right to have their own state on Palestinian land. And in the 70s, the situation or the relationship between the PLO and the United States was very tense, but on certain occasions, the PLO played a very constructive role, helped the United States in Lebanon during the Civil War. They actually provided protection for the US Embassy in Beirut, because the US Embassy was in West Beirut, and the PLO and their allies had control of West Beirut, and they provided protection to the US Embassy. They also played a crucial role in the late 70s and early 80s in releasing many American hostages who were held by different groups and factions in Lebanon. And this, in a way, started to improve the relationship between the two sides, convince the Americans that they can find pragmatic elements within the PLO who are not necessarily anti-American and who can work with the United States in order to improve the relationship between the two sides. After the expulsion of the PLO in 1982, they went to Tunisia, and they were no longer near the borders with Israel. And I have to take you, if you allow me, to 1978. It was President Jimmy Carter, actually, who in 1978 called for the creation of a a national homeland for the Palestinians. President Bush in 2003 called for the creation of a Palestinian state that can live side by side with Israel in peace and security. But it was President Jimmy Carter in 1978 who was the first US president to call for the creation of a national homeland, he called it, for the Palestinian people. Of course, he came under attack from Israel and pro-Israel groups in this country. The US representative or observer at the UN, Andrew Young, if anyone remembers who Andrew Young, a black diplomat, on a social occasion, chatted with the PLO representative in New York. And the reporters caught him talking to Dr. Zuhdi Tarazi at the time, and they published the picture in the newspaper, and he had to resign because he was socializing with the PLO observer at the United Nations. This tells you how difficult the relationship was and how the US tried always to abandon or to distance itself from the PLO. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the National Security Advisor in 1977, made his famous statement when he said, "Bye-bye PLO." I mean, that was a statement that he made to indicate that the US administration will never deal with the PLO and that the PLO is not a recognized player in Middle East politics. Of course, things changed, the political situation on the ground changed, and in 1988, the PLO took the unprecedented step of recognizing Israel's right to exist when they announced in 1988 at the Palestine National Council meeting in Algeria that the PLO recognizes UN Security Council Resolution 242 and 338, which of course recognize Israel's right to exist, and renounced violence. And this opened the door for the first official dialogue between the PLO and the United States. And then in 1991, I'm going to take you quickly through some stations here. 1991, the Palestinians took part with the Jordanians in a joint delegation at the Madrid Peace Conference under the auspices of the United States and the Soviet Union. the first such international conference that brought Israel, the Palestinians, Jordanians, Lebanese, and Syrians, and the Egyptians, of course. And in 1993, the Oslo Accords were signed here in Washington in September 1993 under the auspices of President Bill Clinton. And then in 1994, the United States officially recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people and allowed the PLO to function officially in this country for the first time. But they, of course, attached many restrictions to the work of the PLO in this country that somehow undermined and hampered their ability to be active in the United States. And then from 1994 until today, we do have an open relationship with the United States. I think it is a relationship that is based on mutual interest. I mean, we don't have much in strategic assets to offer to the United States like Israel, but the fact that we are an important player, crucial player in the Middle East conflict, and that the fact that without us there will be no permanent peace in the Middle East makes that relationship important and significant. And we have been enjoying for the last 16, 17 years an open channel of communication with the U.S. administration. It's been, we experience the ebbs and lows. Ebb and what's the opposite of the ebb? Yeah, I mean up and down of the relationship, and but we are treated with respect, and they listen to our views, and we don't agree on everything, but we agree on the importance of trying to conclude this conflict once and for all. This is, in a nutshell, again, just some of the important juncture in PLO-U.S. relationship. I have to just maybe add before I move to the other topic, which is the current state of politics today. It was President Obama who, after becoming president of the United States, said for the first time that ending the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the creation of a Palestinian state is in the national security interests of the United States of America. For the first time, an American president says that ending the conflict and the creation of a Palestinian state serves the U.S. national security interests. And he took it a step further to what President Bush said a few years ago, that a Palestinian state should be created. So I, of course, be more than happy to answer any questions related to the points I made or any other points that come up to your mind when we open the floor for questions. Now, on the current situation, I mean, the Palestinians have decided long time ago that the peaceful resolution of the conflict with Israel is a strategic option. And contrary to what many say, is that it is only a tactical ploy, that the Palestinians want to get the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and then East Jerusalem, and then they will continue later to try to claim the rest of the land that belonged to us at one point. I think we have made it clear that our fight is for the creation of a Palestinian state in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, with East Jerusalem as its capital. In 1988, we made that historic compromise, what we call the historic compromise, which is accepting 22% of what used to be historic Palestine to be the future Palestinian state. In return, we said that we will be willing to end the conflict and end all historical claims. And ending the conflict, of course, means ending hostilities, belligerence between the two peoples. And ending the claims means that the Palestinians, after signing a peace treaty and after agreeing to that peace treaty, are not going to come back a few years later and say, well, we want to open this treaty, we have more claims in what used to be historic Palestine. And we have made that position clear to Israelis, Americans, and everybody around the world that this is the end game for us. It's not the beginning, but rather the end of the conflict with Israel. And today, we continue to be committed to the two-state solution because we believe that the two-state solution will provide both peoples, Palestinians and Israelis, the chance to preserve their own national identities. We are now in a forced marriage. And I think what we need to do is to get a divorce as soon as possible. And after we get a divorce, maybe we can take some time to be on our own, contemplate the options for the future. And then maybe we can approach each other and start dating again. But before we get divorced, I don't think that we can sustain this situation. Whoever tells you that this current situation is sustainable is misleading you and deceiving you. Because, as we were talking earlier, Israel today is not safer than what it used to be 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Every day goes by without reaching an agreement to end the conflict with the Palestinians. Israel becomes less secured. 5 years ago, we didn't have, regional external actors or forces as powerful as they are today. And the more we wait, people who argue that the time is not right, that we cannot solve all the issues, they are too complicated, that we have to defer them until later, we have learned from the Oslo experience. In Oslo, we agreed that we have to have an interim period. The purpose of the interim period, the 5 years interim period from 1993 to 1999, actually 1994 to 1999, ended with more acrimonies and hostilities between the two sides, and no confidence was built because actions on the ground dictated the political discourse and dictated the political direction of the two leaderships. And we agreed to defer Jerusalem, refugees, settlements, borders, security, until later, so that we both can enjoy 5 years of tranquility and security and peace and build confidence, and then we can sit and try to sort out all these problems, this time hopefully in a much more cordial and friendlier manner. But unfortunately, the situation on the ground made that extremely difficult and almost impossible. And 1999 came, and there was no permanent status agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So we cannot accept to defer any of these major issues until later. If we want to solve the conflict, we have to deal with all the issues at the same time in order to put an end to this conflict once and for all. And we remain committed to a peaceful resolution to the conflict, but there are obligations that the two sides accepted to undertake. When we say that Israel must cease settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, we are not putting a precondition. People tell you, Israelis tell you that this is a Palestinian precondition. No, it's not. It's something that Israel accepted under the roadmap of 2003. The first phase of the roadmap, and you can all Google it, roadmap 2003, phase 1, it says that the Israeli obligation is to cease settlement activities, including natural growth. So when Palestinians tell the Israelis, you have to cease these activities, we are telling them, please respect your obligations. The same way the Israelis ask us to respect and implement our obligations, we expect them to implement and respect their obligations. Because continued settlement activities means that we Palestinians will not be able to establish a sovereign, contiguous, viable Palestinian state in the West Bank. For many of you, or some of you who have been to the West Bank, you can see in your eyes the impact of these settlements on Palestinian daily life. The fact that these settlements are dissecting Palestinian territory in a way that it will be impossible to establish a Palestinian state. So if Israelis want to negotiate with me on the future of this land, why are they continuing to plant settlements in that land? Why can't they leave it subject to the negotiations? The future of the settlements, the fate of the settlements, is to be determined in the negotiations, not the settlement activities. There's a big difference when Israelis say, well, this is a permanent status issue. Why are the Palestinians making a big fuss about the settlements? We will discuss it in the permanent status negotiations. We will discuss the fate and the future of the settlements that were built illegally on Palestinian land, but not the settlement activities themselves. We have the right to oppose these settlement activities because they are undermining the prospects of establishing and creating a Palestinian state. So we are willing to return to the negotiating table, but we cannot go to the negotiating table at the same time the Israelis are doing all what they can to impose facts on the ground, to undermine the prospects of successful negotiations. From continued settlement activities, confiscation of Palestinian land, demolishing of Palestinian homes, Israelis are coming with certificates of deeds, to call them, to showing that they own property in East Jerusalem from 1920. 85% of West Jerusalem is owned by Palestinians. 85% of West Jerusalem is owned by Palestinians who fled in 1948. And many thousands of them have those property ownership deeds with them. Why do we keep opening the wounds of the past? Many Palestinians argue that we should, the same way Israelis are claiming properties in East Jerusalem and elsewhere, we should go to Israeli courts and say, we have certificates of ownership for certain properties and lands inside Israel, and we should claim them back. But I don't think personally that this will solve the conflict. It will just open the wounds. It will take us back rather than forward. You have now a Palestinian pragmatic leadership whom you know that is coming under fire every day because of their desire to make a deal with Israel and to end this conflict once and for all. This pragmatic leadership will not be there forever. You will not see people like me and like my own leadership who are calling for a two-state solution and end to conflict, allowing Israel to live for the first time ever in peace and security, and giving Israel the legitimacy that it needs in that part of the world. We cannot continue to advocate this line if we cannot deliver. And right now, the Palestinian leadership is going through a mode of crisis because in front of the Palestinian people, we have failed to deliver an end to the Israeli military occupation and the creation of a Palestinian state. And we cannot continue to lie to our people and deceive our people and tell them there is a so-called peace process that will end the conflict and will create a Palestinian state. What we had for the last 20 years is a process, but no peace. And now it is time that we get engaged in a process that will lead to peace. And the United States has to play its role of being an honest broker once and for all. Because the U.S. has to be the U.S. has a great responsibility in seeing this conflict come to an end. What we are seeing in Egypt, I don't think is directly related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but it is part of the resentment, the disappointment of the peoples of the region for the lack of political progress in that region. And the Palestinian-Israeli, Arab-Israeli conflict is an impediment to that, because many Arab countries have used the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as a pretext for not having more open societies, more political pluralism. You know, the conflict with Israel, you know, compels us to do this and that. And I think this, what is happening in Egypt, should be actually an incentive to move forward to try to end the Palestinian-Israeli and the larger Arab-Israeli conflict, and not to wait for more unexpected developments in the region to happen. Israel today knows who its neighbors are. In 5-10 years, they may not predict who their neighbors will be. And right now, it is a struggle for those who support a peaceful resolution and those who are advocating extremism and continued occupation. And I think we all should support the first option. Thank you very much.
I'm sure that most of the questions will relate to more current events, and therefore I want to ask you one question on the original topic, and that's the relations between the US and the Palestinians. And that is, in what way did 9/11 affect, if it had any effect, on the relationship between the states and people? Do you think that there is a change in the attitudes of the American people towards the Palestinians as Arabs, as Muslims, after 9/11?
Well, of course. I mean, we are Arabs, we are Palestinians, Arabs and Muslims. I would say the majority of us are Muslims because we do have Christians amongst us. And September 11 affected us significantly. And I mean, it was good to see a US administration, even when this country was under attack, that came out publicly immediately and warned against any reaction by the people here. And I have to admit that you are lucky to be living in a tolerant country like the United States of America. This is a very, very tolerant country, because if this happened in a different country, I think the reaction would have been much uglier than what you have seen here. I mean, in the aftermath, I believe only 3 people were attacked and killed, and one of them by even mistaken identity in Texas. But the government was swift in doing that. This put us on the defensive, because the attacks themselves were of course deplorable, condemned, but they also created the opportunity for certain forces in this country to use that attack so that they can start this clash of civilization. Muslims, Christians, them, us. They don't like our way, our freedom, our democracy. They don't like our way of living. That's why they hate us, which is not true. If you go to Arab and Muslim countries and to the Palestinian people have nothing but admiration to this country and to its way of living. And that's why you see many students, even here on campus in your university, everywhere. Palestinians come here, Saudis come here, Pakistanis come here, because they like this country and they choose to live in this country as well. So it did put us on the defensive for quite some time. And at the time, Ariel Sharon was the Prime Minister of Israel. And he shrewdly used the attacks to tell the United States that, you see, Israel and the United States are victims of the same enemy. And we are both on the same boat, we are under attack, so we need to join hands and need to join forces. And he very much influenced the thinking of the administration at the time. And that's when the administration came out and said, it's either with us or against us, there is no in between. It's either black or white, there is no gray. And I think he played an important role. I wouldn't say that deliberately to antagonize the United States or to make the United States more antagonistic to the Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims, but he saw a political opportunity, and this is politics, to try to tell the Americans that we are the victims of the same enemy. Let's join hands. And this further complicated the relationship between the Palestinians and the United States.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to ask a question on the relations between the United States and the Palestinians? Because I see many hands, people want to talk about other things.
Not a popular topic.
Offered my question on the other issue. Well, who were those people then in Ramallah and the other parts of the territories who were cheering after 9/11?
Well, I mean, I have to admit that maybe you saw a small, very small group of people who did cheer. You saw that in Europe, in parts of Europe, not only in Jerusalem. You were talking about, not in Ramallah. I mean, that incident I remember very well. It was in East Jerusalem, and a few Palestinians were cheering and celebrating. It's a bunch of ignorant people who do not represent the majority of the Palestinians. And I think in the aftermath of that attack, the Palestinian position, both at the official and the popular levels, were very clear in condemning what happened. Nobody would have tolerated or accepted what happened on September 11.
So we are moving to other current affairs. Oh, go ahead.
I read that elections are probably going to happen pretty soon in the territories, and I was wondering if a Hamas win is likely, and if it is, or even if it's not, how that would affect the relationship at this point between the countries.
Two entities, you have to say, not the two countries, it's one country. The elections that we are calling for are municipal elections, local elections, council elections, or whatever you want to call them. Not the national elections, the legislative and presidential elections that the Palestinian Authority and the PLO has been trying to hold for the last year now or so. Hamas has rejected in January 2009 to hold national elections to pick a new president and a new legislative council, which is like parliament in the Palestinian areas. The elections we are calling for are for local councils, municipalities in the West Bank. The PLO called for that last summer, but Hamas refused to allow for the election commission to even visit the Gaza Strip to prepare for the elections. So now they are planned to take place on July 9th of 2010. I personally don't think it should be in both the West Bank and Gaza, but I personally don't think that Hamas will accept to hold them in the Gaza Strip. Now the question that we will be facing, whether we should go ahead, despite the fact that we are not holding them in Gaza, there is a strong support for this idea, because we cannot continue to be under the mercy of Hamas and stop this democratic process from taking place. So, it's still 6 months to go or 5 months to go. I hope Hamas will accept for the elections to be held in Gaza, but I don't see that happen.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
On the same topic, to what degree does the PLO represent the people of Gaza?
I'm sorry?
To what degree does the PLO represent Gaza?
I mean, this is a difficult question to answer. It's the PLO, you have to understand, I mean, not everybody agrees with the PLO. I mean, I represent the PLO here, but I on many occasions sit and discuss and question and criticize. I mean, we live in an open society. The PLO is more of a symbol for the Palestinians. It is a national symbol that represents their struggle for freedom and independence. Now, when I was younger in the 70s, I mean, it was our savior, because after many years of being controlled by others and not having a say to decide our future or our destiny, seeing the PLO emerge as a national movement to represent my national goals and objectives and aspiration was something huge. And I think the PLO continues today to be the national symbol that represents the Palestinian people everywhere. Now, Palestinians may agree or not agree with certain policies of the PLO, certain actions. And this is legitimate to ask and to question. But I think the idea of the PLO, preserving the PLO, and what the PLO symbolizes should be a top priority for every Palestinian. So Gaza, I don't think everybody in Gaza supports Hamas. I know they have strong support in Gaza, but I don't think that all the Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip support Hamas and they are against the PLO. The same thing in the West Bank. I don't think all the Palestinians in the West Bank support the PLO and are against Hamas. It's difficult to get clear results if you don't go to elections. That's why we are telling Hamas, let's go to elections and see what the people will choose. We haven't had elections since 2006.
Yes, please.
What implications do you think the current political changes, including, of course, the vote in Tunisia, also the uprising now in Egypt, what kind of implications?
Uprising, I like that. That's a Palestinian term, by the way, the uprising.
What kind of implications could this have on the Palestinian-Israeli peace talks? And what could the Palestinians and the Israelis do in order to give momentum to the peace talks and not go backwards?
Well, again, I think what is going in the region is indirectly related again to what is going on in the Middle East, and I did mention that when I spoke earlier. The Arab-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, has always been used as a pretext for less political freedoms and openness by different governments and countries in the Arab world. And I believe that a quick resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli and the larger Arab-Israeli conflict will contribute to promoting democracy and openness and political pluralism in the Middle East as a whole. And therefore, if the United States wants to support these forces of democracy and political pluralism, they should work diligently in order to end the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, because as long as that conflict is there, it will have an impact on many developments in the region. And I don't think Egypt is going to be the last. I mean, we started with Tunis. I see different situation between the two. I don't think Tunisia is Egypt. Egypt is 80 million people. Egypt has a peace treaty with Israel. Egypt has a political and strategic and military weight, and compared to Tunisia, with all due respect to Tunisia, two different stories there. But the thing that you have to keep in mind, this is not the end. I think we will see more of that happen in the future. Now, how would that impact the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? And I hear voices in Israel, the foreign minister of Israel, Lieberman, says, oh, you see, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is not the crux of the problems, the issues, The instability that we are seeing in the Middle East has nothing to do with the conflict with the Palestinians. On every occasion they try to say that not resolving the conflict does not contribute to the instability of the region. Wrong. Wrong. Not resolving the conflict will always contribute to the instability of the region. And as I said earlier, will make Israel less secure. Because today Israel knows who is ruling Egypt. And they may still know who will be expected to rule Egypt. I don't think the Islamic Brotherhood will be the dominant force in Egypt. I don't think so. I think Egyptians in general are secular. They are educated, they are open, and they don't want to promote democracy and openness to have another system that will continue with the same of what they have today. I think they want real change. So I'm not worried about the Islamic Brotherhood controlling Egypt. And no matter who will come to Egypt, will continue to respect Egypt's treaty with Israel and will maintain the relationship between Egypt and the United States. Because what is the alternative? War? Nobody can afford war these days. Not even Israel can afford war today. Israel cannot afford war because war is costly. these days. The days of lightning attacks, 6-day war, 3 days war, go in and out, are over. Today, if you want to start a war, you can never know when you will be able to end it. And the opponents will bring it to your home. It's not anymore you go in and out. So nobody in Egypt would nullify the treaty with Israel, because what would that mean? Declaring war. And Egypt doesn't want to declare war. They want to build their country. They want to provide prosperity. They want to provide food for their own people. The same thing with the United States. But Israel must watch the situation carefully, because these developments could directly impact the security concerns and the survivability of Israel in the future. And that's why we need to put this conflict behind us to be able to focus more on other issues.
Thank you. Yes, please.
How do you think the Palestinian-Israeli conflict affected the revolution in Egypt?
How do I think?
Yeah, like what's the...
If we, I mean, I think this is related to the lady's question here. I mean, what I'm saying is that
How do you think that the revolution has any relation to what's happening in Palestine?
I don't think it's directly related. I think Egyptians they have their plate full of issues, domestic issues that they are trying to improve and change. And of course, Egypt remains part of the Arab world. And like I told you, it's a very strategically important country, not only for Palestinians, but for most of the Arabs and the Muslims. So people are watching what's going on in Egypt carefully.
Hi, this is a two-part question about what you mentioned about refugees. First off, I wanted to know, why is it that the Palestinian people have a special right to the special refugee right that other ethnic groups not have, including Jews that were moved out of Muslim lands in the 1950s? And a second part to that question, you mentioned that the PLO has no interest in taking over all of Israel proper, just within the 67 borders, which I hope is true. And if that's the case, then how can they still advocate a right of return for the Palestinians to
Okay.
property? Because if that is to be the case by numbers, they would outnumber the Jews within Israel, and the Jewish state would cease to exist.
Right. Okay. Very, very important and very good question. We are not against ethnic groups calling for their rights. I mean, you had refugees in Kosovo, you had refugees in all over the world who, fought, struggled to go back to their homes, and they enjoyed the international support. So, in principle, we are against kicking any ethnic group out of their native lands, be it Palestinian, be it Jewish, be it Christian, be it Kosovars, whatever. We are against. As Palestinians, we are against uprooting people from their own lands and turning them into refugees living in foreign countries and not allowing them to come back to their countries. On the issue of Jews who are living in Arab countries, it's not a Palestinian problem. I mean, did I, as a Palestinian, kick any Jew out of their land? Did I contribute to the decision of certain Arab countries who decided to deny them their privileges and rights, and in some cases force them to immigrate to Israel? You also have to keep in mind that Israel was interested also in attracting these Jewish communities who lived in certain Arab countries. I mean, with the exception of Morocco, maybe Tunisia, some of these Jews remained there, and until today, they are protected, and their synagogues. You are shaking your heads, but this is true. I mean, Morocco and Tunisia, I'm telling you about Jewish community that existed in Iraq, in Yemen, in Egypt, in Syria, that did not enjoy the same privileges. I'm telling you examples where Arab countries tried to provide them with whatever they need so that they can stay. Small minorities are left in Tunisia and in Morocco. I'm not talking about thousands. But this is an issue that you can take with these countries. Why do you want to take it with me? I'm not Morocco, I'm not Tunisia. If you have an issue with Iraq, with Yemen, take it with them. Why take it with me as a Palestinian? I didn't kick Jews from Palestine. I opened my land. My grandfather was a partner with a Jew in a bakery shop. They owned a bakery shop before 1948. They never had any problem. They lived in peace. Only when political Zionism wanted to take the whole land, and they didn't want to share the land, we started the problem. Because my grandfather, my mother, my grandparents' family lived with Jews in West Jerusalem as good neighbors. They never had any problem. And we don't have a problem today with Jews. Don't misunderstand me. We don't have any problem with coexisting with Jews, as long as you can respect, not you, but as long as Israelis can respect my right also to live equal and have my own state and be free of occupation and of oppression. On the issue of the right of return, in 2002, the Arabs approved the Arab Peace Initiative, which used to be a Saudi peace plan and turned into an Arab Peace Initiative in 2000 during the Arab Summit in Beirut. On the right of return, it says, a just and agreed upon resolution to the Palestinian refugee problem based on UN General Assembly Resolution 194, okay? A just and agreed upon. Agreed upon with who? When we say agreed upon with who? With Israel. We are saying a just and agreed upon resolution. When we say agreed upon, we mean agreed upon with Israel. We understand the Israeli concern, but the right of return is so fundamental. If we cannot solve the problem of the Palestinian refugees, there will be no solution for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And we have said repeatedly that we want to solve it in a way that will take into account Israel's demographic concerns. We understand that the worst nightmare for Israelis is to think about 5 million Palestinians coming back or 6 million Palestinians coming back. How long did it take Israel to absorb 1 million Russian Jews? 10 years. And for the Palestinians in the future, it will take us years and years to absorb a few thousands. And we understand that the bulk of them will return to a future Palestinian state. What we are trying to do to maximize the options available for these Palestinian refugees to choose. We want to give them like 6, 7 options that they can choose from in order to end and close that chapter, because Israel cannot deny. That's the problem we are having with the Israelis. The Israelis think if they acknowledge their responsibility for the creation of the Palestinian refugee problem, it will automatically mean that the creation of the state of Israel was illegitimate. How can we, they told us in the negotiations, acknowledge that we are the ones who created the Palestinian refugee problem, which is true. Who created the Palestinian refugee problem? The 700,000 who left in 1948. Why did they leave? Because of the creation of the state of Israel, the war that erupted, they had to flee. They listened to some of their leaders who called them to flee. I know what is on your mind. But mostly because of massacres and attacks that took place against civilians, they had to flee. Regardless of the reason, they fled their homes. So Israel has to somehow acknowledge its responsibility for the creation of that problem. But the implementation of that UN Resolution 194, which calls for the right of the return, the mechanics of the implementation of that resolution will be negotiated between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's not something that I'm going to comment on the table and say 5 million or nothing, or 3 million or nothing. But I have a task to end the exile of my own people. I have 250,000 refugees in Lebanon who cannot find a job because the Lebanese government does not allow them to work. And their situation is so dire and so bad that they are a priority for us to bring back in after any future agreement with Israel. But how many will go? How many will exercise the right of return? How many will exercise the right of return with compensation? How many will take compensation, will not return? This is all left for negotiations and for discussions between us and the Israelis. But I cannot, and don't ask me to abandon the right of return, because this is a core issue for my cause. This is the core issue, the Palestinians who fled their homes in 1948. But at the same time, I will do it in a way to be agreed with the Israelis, in a way that will not undermine and threaten the demographic balance of Israel. Bringing 5 million Palestinian refugees, what will be left of Israel? I mean, but we have to put an end. We have to solve that issue. We cannot avoid it and not discuss it. It has to be discussed. And Israel accepted in the peace treaty that we signed with them in Oslo to discuss the refugee problem with the Palestinians.
Let me add here a question. If the right of the Palestinians is the core issue of the Jews was their right to create their own state. If every nation has the right to have a nation state, the Jews have the right to have the nation state.
Yes.
It wasn't a nation state for others, but for Jews. So why do you insist not to recognize Israel
A good
as a Jewish
question.
state?
Very good question. I'll tell you why. First of all, we have recognized Israel in 1993. We exchanged letters in which Israel recognized the PLO and we recognized the State of Israel. So we gave that recognition in 1993. In my view, that was a mistake. We should have had Israel recognize a Palestinian state, not the PLO. We said that we recognize the State of Israel, and in return, Israel recognized the PLO. We should have insisted that Israel recognize a Palestinian state, a state for state. And now you can see, until today, we are not managing to get Israeli recognition of a Palestinian state. In 1996, the Palestine National Council convened in Gaza and nullified, revoked all clauses in the Palestinian National Charter that called for the destruction of the State of Israel. In 1998, after the Wye River Memorandum was signed, Prime Minister Netanyahu was the Prime Minister at the time, asked President Clinton to ask the Palestinians once again to reiterate their position that these clauses were revoked and nullified. President Clinton came himself to attend the Palestine National Council session in Gaza in 1998, and the PLO, Palestine National Council, the Palestine National Council, once again met and reiterated that the Palestinians are no longer calling for the destruction of the State of Israel. What else is expected of us?
The Jewish state.
The Jewish state. The Jewish state is problematic for us for two important reasons, and I want you to understand that. One, you have 1.2 million Palestinians who are a minority living inside Israel. 1.2 million Arabs, Palestinians, Christians, and Muslims who are today, and you know that, being discriminated against. They are not equal citizens, except voting. The only equal right they have to Israeli Jews is to vote, to get a job, to be appointed in a large corporation or something. You know that they don't have a chance. They are not equal. So these 1.2 million Arabs, Muslims, and Christians, if we say that Israel is a Jew, it has a right to be Jewish, what am I doing to these 1.2 million Palestinians? I'm telling them that you don't have rights, that this is going to be a predominantly Jewish state, and you are going to be a minority with lesser, not equal rights, and etc. The second thing is the issue of the refugees. Because if I acknowledge that Israel is Jewish, then I am telling you that up front, I am forsaking and giving up the right of return. Something I'm not prepared to do. And I'm prepared to discuss with the Israelis, but I'm not prepared to give up the right of return of my people, because I have no right to give up the right of return. So for these two reasons, we are saying This is an issue that has to be discussed after reaching an agreement with Israel. And Israel can call itself whatever they want. But why are they asking me to recognize them as such? They can call themselves whatever they want. It's called the State of Israel today. They want to call it the empire of the Jewish people around the world. They can go ahead. They want to call it the republic, the largest republic of Israelites to ever exist. They can call it whatever they want. But don't ask me to recognize it, because I cannot recognize it as a Jewish state for these two reasons.
Okay. Yes, please.
In the negotiations that you've been involved in the last few years, at the end of the day, what is it that Israel wants? Because from what I've read and what I've heard, the Palestinian Authority, especially under Mahmoud Abbas, has accepted many of the conditions that Israel has asked. And the second question is, can you describe to us your life under occupation as a child?
We need much more time to do that, for the second part. But on the first one, I think, let me tell you something. I mean, the best way to try to resolve this conflict is if both parties or each party put themselves in the other party's shoes, or, put yourself in my place, I put myself in your place. And this is an exercise we did in the late 90s, and I think it's the most important or the most useful approach to try to do that. I am not underestimating Israeli concerns and fears. I can't do that, because if I do that, then I'm not seeking a lasting peace with the Israelis. I understand that they have certain legitimate security concerns. I understand that they are driven by a history of persecution, although, once again, it wasn't the Palestinians, nor the Arabs, nor the Muslims who created that persecution. It was the West. And let's say it clearly, it was Western civilization who persecuted the Jews. It wasn't Muslim, Arab, or Oriental civilization. So I understand all these concerns. I understand them. But security, yes, but the humiliation, no. If you want to have your security, it's not at the expense of my dignity. When I am telling the Israelis today that as Palestinians, I am willing to accept every security demand, given that a third party will be the one, or a third party will be involved in implementing these security arrangements, not Israelis. Why the Israelis are balking? We told them even NATO can come, American troops. But after we create a Palestinian state, there will be no military/civilian presence of Israelis in our soil. We can't. We can't allow, I had a discussion with my counterpart at the Brookings Institute a month ago. And he was trying to imply that the Israelis want to maintain control of early warning stations and certain bases in the future Palestinian state. And I looked at him, I said, I would have accepted that offer if you were Bangladesh or if you were Gabon, but not Israel. You have been occupying me for 44 years now. You want to turn into a peacekeeper from an occupier overnight? How could that happen? How do you want me to, and I was talking to him, how do you want me to accept that? I cannot accept it. But bring any other third party, and we are willing to discuss your security concerns. At the end of the day, they want security. That's the answer to your question. But at the end of the day, we are willing to discuss with them legitimate security concerns, not security that will be disguised in continued control and occupation of the Palestinian people, because independence means no presence of Israelis in our future territory, except as visitors and neighbors, but not as occupiers.
I recommend you to read the new piece that was published today in the New York Times. I think it's not on the paper, but it's only on the internet, by Avishai, Bernard Avishai, who wrote about the 36 meetings that Olmert had with Abu Mazen and the agreement that they've almost reached. He argues there that the security issue was solved. There was no problem about the security element. There were some other issues. But let me ask you another question concerning that. Even many moderate Israelis or leftist Israelis who will support your position say today there's no way there is going to be peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians because you don't represent the majority. And you have a very weak leadership. And the Hamas is much stronger. And if you negotiate with, see the reaction of your leadership to the revelations of Wikipedia. Suddenly they were afraid that you gave so much to the Israelis. So yes, we trust you or your organization. We think that we can find common denominator, but it will take another 10 or 20 years, not in our times. See what happened in Gaza. What answer would you give them?
The answer I would give them is that I think you still find a majority of Palestinians who support a peaceful resolution to the conflict and the two-state solution. Even a majority of Israelis, and this is this is very, very ironic because you have majorities on both sides who support the two-state solution, but yet you have a majority, I think, on both sides who don't think that the time is right for concluding an agreement. And I think the mainstream Palestinians are in favor of a political solution. And I don't think that the camp that advocates military struggle and violence is stronger within the Palestinian society. When I talk, I'm not a minority when I'm talking like that. I'm not a minority. Maybe I'm not, heard as much as those who are opposed. They make much more noise than me among the Palestinian people. But I am the majority. I am the majority in my vision of what the solution should be. That I want an end to the Israeli military occupation. I want freedom for my people. I want an end to the exile and misery of Palestinian refugees, a dignified way to create a homeland for them that they can call home and can, passport, national identity, live a dignified life. This is my objective. I don't think I am different from the people in Gaza, from Hamas, or from the PFLP, or all these other factions when it comes to what is our objective. Our objective is a Palestinian state, West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem. Even Hamas says that. End of the conflict, return of Palestinian refugees. Return of Palestinian refugees, again, we can discuss the mechanisms. But I don't consider my position to be a position of minority. I don't consider my position to be a weak position. No, on the contrary, what is the alternative? What is the alternative? And as for whether I will be capable to implement that agreement, if I manage to reach an agreement with the Israelis that will put an end to the conflict in a very satisfactory manner, and we have said repeatedly that we will present such an agreement to the Palestinian people for referendum. If I can give the Palestinian people a satisfactory agreement that covers all the issues, why should I be worried about implementing it? And if it enjoys the support of the majority of the Palestinian peoples inside and outside, contrary to the leaks that you saw, we never said that the referendum will only cover the Palestinians of the West Bank and Gaza and will not include the Palestinians in the diaspora. Of course, the Palestinians in the diaspora have to be involved. It's their future, too. If I can get the support of the majority of the Palestinians, then why should I be worried about implementing it? It's not an issue who militarily is stronger than the other, who controls what. It's what is the nature of the final agreement that I can present to my people and say, vote to that agreement.
Thank you.
Yes. You scoff at the idea that Israel would maintain security forces in the West Bank, but Israel moved out of the Palestinian populated areas of the West Bank in 1994 protected. Don't you think that your track record has anything to do with the fact that Israel wants to maintain its own security there?
Well, the Palestinian Authority controlled the Gaza Strip much longer before Israel withdrew from 1994. So they controlled the Gaza Strip for 11 years before Israel. I was involved.
I'm talking about after Israel.
Yes. I understand. I understand. Again, I mean, I can understand you're trying to prove a point here, which is you're right to do that. But if you go back to February 1994, Hamas did not carry out one single suicide attack against Israel before that date. Do you know what happened in February 1994? In Hebron, at Al Ibrahimi Mosque, an Israeli Baruch Goldstein. Let me tell you something. No. At a large scale, there was no attacks. Of course there were. I mean, what do you expect? You expect things to be calm 100%? They will never be calm. There are forces who are opposed to agreement on both sides. But let me, on the suicide, the major wave of suicide bombings, February 1994, Baruch Goldstein, and one person who was doing all these attacks, you know, it's not a whole people, it's an organization that was carrying out, went in, I'm talking about Hamas's attacks and other groups, went into Al Ibrahimi Mosque, the dawn prayer in Ramadan, the holy month of Ramadan, and killed 3 dozen people there and injured many, okay? In retaliation, Hamas used that as a pretext to carry out attacks, and then it became systematic. It became part of their what they called resistance of the Israelis. And you know our position very well. The PLO position from day one condemned these attacks, and we said and continue to say that targeting civilians, be it Israelis or Palestinians, is deplorable and not acceptable. Now, I know I'm coming to your question. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, sir. Listen, if you want to talk about excesses, do you want to justify the use of F-16s to shell civilian neighborhoods? F-16s deployed. I live in Ramallah. I saw an F-16 dropping 2 1,000-pound bombs on a police station 200 meters away from my home, and I had children running to hide under the beds. F-16s against an unarmed civilian. So if you call Hamas's attacks to be terrorism by organizations, we Palestinians call that state terrorism. When you use F-16s to do that, so this discussion is not going to help us anymore. 2005, I was involved in the disengagement. Israel pulled out without coordination with the Palestinian Authority. We begged them to coordinate with us. Ariel Sharon said, no, I'm going to pull out. He is the father of unilateralism. Today, they accuse the Palestinians of trying to go unilateral, declaring a Palestinian state. He pulled out from the Gaza Strip without coordinating with us. He didn't give me everything I want. Gaza technically is still under occupation. It is. I'll tell you how. Their land borders, passages are sealed. They cannot go to Egypt. Their sea territorial waters are. Gaza is under siege. You have 1.3 million people in a big prison. The Israelis continue to besiege the Gaza Strip. Gaza never was free and independent. So what you saw on the Gaza Strip is not an end to the occupation. What I'm trying to get is there was no fundamental solution to the problem. The occupation continued. The oppression continued. The hostilities continued from both sides. That's why, instead of looking at that, and I like what you told me earlier, what you said, people give you security, not your weapon?
Security is not your weapon.
Security is your neighbors, or how good with your neighbors, your relationship, how good your relationship with your neighbors is not the problem. I'll give you an example. I promised Dr. Perry to talk about it. The weather. I mean, you know, we all enjoy the weather in this part of the world here. But in Israel, have you noticed that their weather forecasts are mostly inaccurate? Did you wonder why Israel advanced? They have a Silicon Valley there. They have a military industry, advanced country. Why can't they predict the weather properly? Have you ever questioned yourself why? You know why? It's because the neighboring countries don't give Israel data about the weather conditions to enable them to predict the weather properly. Neither Syria, nor Lebanon, nor Jordan, nor Egypt, the one who have peace treaties with them, do not provide them with information about changes in the weather conditions so that Israel can predict accurately what is the weather condition. Now, what this tells you, no matter how powerful Israel is militarily, no matter how much weapons they have, no matter how long the occupation will continue, the only way for Israel's security and well-being is to have a good relationship with their neighbors. And the first step to do that, to end the military occupation of Palestinian and Arab lands. As long as Israel continues to occupy the Palestinians and the Lebanese land and the Syrian land, there will be no peace in the region. And everybody will pay a heavy price for the lack of peace. This is the only way to make, to get security, is to have peace. Not to have security and peace, you have to have peace and then security.
No, it's not, no. Sorry.
In the back there. Internal Palestinian divisions, you know, something that we all Palestinians would like to see come to an end as soon as possible, but unfortunately, again, I personally don't see any indications that this will happen soon. The problem is, in 2009, October 2009, the Egyptian government presented a paper. They called it the Egyptian Reconciliation Paper, and they presented to Hamas and presented to Fatah. Both made comments, made observations, agreed to sign. The Egyptians called, said, send your representatives immediately for signature. Fatah sent its representative. Hamas did not. We signed, Hamas did not. Until today, we tell Hamas, if you sign the Egyptian paper, we will do 3 things immediately. 1, we will have a national unity government. 2, we will start reconstruction efforts in the Gaza Strip to rebuild what Israel destroyed in 2008 when they attacked Gaza, because we have pledges from the international community, but unfortunately, we cannot get the money or the material inside. And 3, we will prepare for national elections, presidential and legislative election. Unfortunately, until today, Hamas refuses to sign the Egyptian paper. And this is the major obstacle towards ending this strife and these internal divisions between among the Palestinians. If Hamas accepts tomorrow to sign the Egyptian paper, we will end the conflict immediately and we will form a national unity government with them.
What are they demanding from you? Are there any negotiations?
You mean what are their reservations? What are their objections? There are more than one point that they brought up after the Egyptians concluded their discussions with us. You know, when they presented the paper to both sides, both sides made comments and made observations. After we were supposed to go and sign, they reopened the paper again and talking about issues related to security forces, to elections, to the committee that will oversee the preparation for elections, some fundamental issues. The Palestinian Authority told them as recent as 3 months ago, sign the Egyptian paper and we will sit down with you to discuss your reservations, but after you sign it, not before you sign it. And they still refuse until today.
Let's take the last question.
In the
Someone
back,
in
back,
the
back,
there,
back,
yeah.
back.
Who
This
is the back?
gentleman
Okay,
there, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh,
Friendly question, huh?
yeah. If the PLO is serious about the peace process, then why do they constantly, well, I wouldn't say constantly, but they tend to deny the Jewish historicity of the land? I remember I read an article in Haaretz that they tried to deny any Jewish connection to the Temple Mount, and there's this new movement going around. They're trying to deny the Jewish historicity to Rachel's tomb, calling it a mosque. How do you answer that?
Well, the issue you are referring to actually was published by someone that I know about Israel, the Jewish link. Listen, nobody denies that Jews have roots in that region, in the whole region of the Middle East. I'm not talking about Palestine. And for me, as a Palestinian, as a Muslim, I have to respect the heritage and the roots of all ethnic groups in that part of the world. Our struggle never was Jewish, Muslim, Jewish, Christian. Never was, and never will be. I mean, we have, again, I told you, I have nothing against Judaism as a religion. As a true Muslim, actually, I have to I have to believe in the three religions and the three prophets if I want to be a true Muslim. And this is stated clearly in the Quran repeatedly. In order to be a true Muslim, I have to believe in God, His prophets, and He mentions them. Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and kutubihi, and all the holy books that He sent to us. It's a fundamental part of my religion. I cannot deny that Jews exist, that the religion exists, okay? I think that article maybe was written with a lot of political context to it, and the Palestinian Authority removed it from the website, and they even retracted. And I think I have to equally say that also the Israelis have to acknowledge that Palestinian Muslims and Christians have also rights in Jerusalem. Today, Israel claims that Jerusalem is opened for Muslims, Christians, and Jews to go and worship in Jerusalem. Here, an American Jew, an American Muslim, American Christian can go to Israel and pray in Jerusalem, or to Palestine, pray in Jerusalem. And a Palestinian from Jericho or Bethlehem, Muslim or Christian, cannot enter these holy sites in Jerusalem. So there is no freedom of religion in Jerusalem or the Holy Land, as the Israelis claim. There is freedom of religion for Israelis, for foreigners, tourists, regardless of their religion. But for Palestinians, unless you have a permit to enter Jerusalem, you cannot enter your holy sites to pray and to worship God. So we want a solution that will treat everybody equally, that people, religions will be respected. The followers of the three major religions will have access to their holy sites, unhindered access to their holy sites, to worship and to visit without being undermined by anyone.
I realize that there are very many more questions, but time is over. So there are issues that are open. The debate will continue. But I want to thank you very much
Thank you
for
very much.
presenting your position so
Thank
well.
you. Thank you.